Hey, Soul Stories fam. We're about to begin a brand new love journey. Please comment on where you're watching from so we can see that our Soul Stories family is all around the world. The Bellecourt restaurant blazed that night like a royal gala. Crystal chandeliers reflected off wine glasses, and the soft hum of violins filled the golden-lit air. Clara Price walked in with the firm belief that this would be the first and only engagement celebration of her life. A year with Derek, the man she had once thought safe, intelligent, and full of promise, had convinced her everything was finally falling into place. He had chosen every detail: the restaurant, the wine, even the burgundy dress that had been hanging in her closet for 3 weeks. "This color suits you better," he'd said with that carefully measured smile. She hadn't argued. A dress wasn't worth ruining a perfect night. The waiter led her forward, voice polished and professional. "Miss Price, your table is ready." Your table? The phrasing made her frown slightly. The main dining hall was filled with familiar faces. Politicians, entrepreneurs, investors, the entire elite circle Derek had always longed to be part of. But when her eyes landed on the center of the room, her heart stumbled. Derek sat there, his perfect smile in place, his hand resting on the back of Sophia Hartwell, heiress to a luxury hotel empire, her golden hair shimmering beneath the light. The chair that should have been Clara's had been replaced. "Derek," she called, her voice roughened by disbelief. "What is this?" He stood, composed to the point of cruelty. "Clara, thank you for coming. Sit down. There's something I need to tell you." She didn't sit. "You can say it right here." He took a slow breath, glancing at Sophia as if for reassurance. "I'm preparing to run for state senate." Sophia understands the political world. She has the background, the network, and she's the partner who can stand beside me. The entire room went silent. Dozens of eyes turned their way. Clara let out a short, cold laugh. "You're breaking up with me? Here? In front of 200 people?" Derek nodded, voice even and rehearsed as though reading from a press release. "I think it's best for both of us. You're too focused on your work. People say you're only with me for the connections." "For the connections?" she repeated, eyes glistening. Whether from tears or fury, even she couldn't tell. Sophia's voice was syrupy sweet, painfully condescending. "It's nothing personal, Ms. Price. Derek just needs someone who already belongs in this world, not someone still trying to climb into it." The folder in Clara's hand slipped and fell. Sheets of blueprints, the project she had spent sleepless nights perfecting, scattered across the polished floor. Derek didn't even bend to help. "I hope you understand," he continued. "This is what's best for both of us." Around them, a few people pulled out their phones. Camera flashes burst. Someone was live streaming. Within minutes, the entire scene flooded the internet. Comments, emojis, laughter. Clara Price, the talented architect, had just become the fiancé dumped in a luxury restaurant. She bent down, gathering each page with trembling hands but dry eyes. "Keep the ring," she said quietly. "Consider it payment for the year I wasted." Then she walked away, through dozens of pitying stares, through the murmurs she would remember for the rest of her life. Even the waiter avoided her eyes. Perhaps everyone had known this was coming. When the Bellecourt doors closed behind her, the Manhattan night wind struck her face, sharp and freezing. She walked until her legs gave out, then sank onto the curb. Rain began to fall, washing away her makeup, soaking the dress Derek had chosen. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Texts, calls, notifications. She didn't open any. She just sat there, curled up, letting the rain mix with her tears. A man's voice cut through the storm, deep and steady. "Miss Price." She looked up. A tall man in a black coat stood before her, holding an umbrella, his gaze sharp and unreadable. His hair was damp from the rain, but his tone was calm, almost unnervingly so. "You have 30 seconds before the reporters get here. Do you really want them filming this?" Clara froze. "Who are you?" "The man who just witnessed that entire show inside," he replied, extending his hand. "And possibly the only one who can help you get everything back." She stared at that hand, steady yet unfamiliar. Before placing hers in it, he led her to a black car waiting nearby. The door closed, sealing them off from the storm. You'll be fine, he said, eyes never leaving hers. And that night, in the cold, rain-drenched heart of Manhattan, Clara Price met Thomas D'Angelo, the powerful, enigmatic CEO of Sterling Group, the man about to turn her entire world upside down. The car door closed, and the sound of rain was cut off as if someone had drawn a thick curtain. The back seat smelled of new leather, and the city lights sliding past the windows cast flickering stripes across Clara's face. She clutched the soaked set of drawings, her back pressed against the seat, her breathing still uneven. The man beside her tilted his head slightly. "Turn off the interior lights," he said. The driver obeyed immediately. The car sank into a gentle darkness, lit only by the faint outlines of the night. "Thank you," Clara said, her voice hoarse and thin, "for the umbrella. And for the ride." "It's nothing," he replied, his tone deep and restrained. "I don't like seeing tragedies broadcast live." She turned to look at him for the first time. A perfectly tailored suit, paired with a charcoal tie, features so sharp and composed that they made you sit up straighter without realizing it. "Who are you?" "Thomas D'Angelo." A short pause. "Sterling Group." The name hit Clara like a jolt of electricity. She knew it. Sterling. A multi-industry empire with infrastructure and real estate projects spanning half the country. She nodded slightly, then looked down at her tightly clasped hands. "Tonight, thank you for pulling me out of those cameras." "Not just tonight." His gaze didn't waver. "I have a proposal." She forced a weary smile. "A job offer?" "I just became social media's laughingstock." "Not a job." He spoke slowly, deliberately, as if placing chess pieces on the exact squares. 6 months as my wife, so I can bring down the man who humiliated you." The air in the car seemed to contract. Clara blinked. "Excuse me?" "I need an ideal wife for the next 6 months, Thomas said plainly. "Sterling's board is voting on transferring the position of executive chairman after the merger. They value stability, a stable family." He leaned slightly closer, his voice lowering. "And you need your dignity restored, and a shield against the crowd laughing outside." Clara let out a small, humorless laugh. "You're talking about a marriage contract?" "Yes." He didn't flinch. "A marriage on paper, a business agreement in reality." "And why me?" Her tone steadied. "New York isn't short on beautiful, suitable women." "Because they haven't had the entire city live stream their humiliation," Thomas replied, brutally honest. "Your story's exploding. If you stand beside me, the narrative changes. Instead of the abandoned bride, they'll write, the architect chosen by the CEO of Sterling. You get your voice back. I get the family image that serves the vote." Clara sat quietly, listening to the soft patter of rain against the window. "And the rules?" "Clear." He leaned back, hands loosely clasped over his knee. "No physical obligations. Separate bedrooms. Public appearances scheduled by my assistant. Charity events, galas, and a few dinners with partners. You retain full control of your career. I won't interfere with your projects. Absolute confidentiality about the arrangement." "And Derek?" The name burned her throat. "You said bring him down." "Legally and publicly," he said evenly. "We have PR and legal departments. The smear campaign against you will collapse under evidence. His staff sent defamatory emails. We'll make them backfire. And his so-called bright political future will crumble once his moral foundation is exposed." Clara studied him. "And in return, what do I owe besides 6 months of a title?" Thomas met her gaze. "You owe nothing. I pay. $500,000. He said the number as casually as laying an envelope on a table. "Half upon marriage registration, half after the board transition. With an integrity clause. If the merger faces unforeseen delays, the remaining payment still stands." A shiver ran down Clara's spine, not from greed, but from how calculated, tidy, and cold it all sounded. "You planned this?" "After seeing you stand up in that restaurant," Thomas replied, "it took me 5 minutes to know your name, your profession, and the viciousness of the people live streaming you." He tilted his head slightly, his eyes softening a fraction. "You don't need saving, but I can give you leverage." The car turned onto a quiet street. Streetlights painted golden streaks across the ceiling. Clara tightened her grip on the drawings, as if to remind herself of where her worth truly lay, in her work. And if I refuse, then I'll still have you driven home safely, and tomorrow your PR team will have to handle a storm already brewing. A brief pause. But if you agree, by morning the headlines will change. She leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment. The cruel comments, the pitying glances, the ring lying cold on the table, all flashed through her mind. When she opened her eyes, her reflection in the window showed damp hair, smudged mascara, but a chin lifted higher than before. "Do you have a contract?" she asked. Thomas nodded. "A draft, short and transparent. Your lawyer can review it if you wish, but I need a preliminary answer tonight. Just yes or no." Clara glanced at his hand resting calmly on the armrest. The hand of a man who scheduled cities, now waiting on the nod of a woman publicly humiliated hours ago. "All right," she said, her voice steady now. "But I have conditions." He raised an eyebrow slightly. "Name them." "I won't be a prop in photographs. I'll have a say in every public appearance, and if any strategy undermines my professional integrity, the agreement ends immediately." A faint curve touched his lips, not quite a smile, perhaps respect. "Accepted." The car slowed in front of a building with discreet security. The driver opened the door. The rain had eased. The city mist wrapped the lights like a thin veil. Before stepping out, Clara turned to him. "You're doing this for the board vote, and for Derek." "For efficiency," Thomas said. "And because I don't like watching injustice win." She nodded. "Tomorrow," she said, "we sign." "Tomorrow," he confirmed. The door opened, and the sound of rain rushed back in. Clara stepped out, clutching her drawings. No longer a torn shield, but a reminder of the one thing she'd never lost, her own ability. That night she accepted a cold proposal. By morning her dignity would have a way home. And Thomas D'Angelo, the most dangerous man in the business world she'd ever met, had just laid the first stone for a deal that could change them both. The next morning a pen drew a clean, decisive line across the thick paper. The contract was short and unnervingly precise. 6 months, public appearances as husband and wife, schedules coordinated by the assistant, separate bedrooms, no intimacy, no emotional involvement, strict confidentiality. The payment of $500,000 was clearly stated, along with the terms of disbursement attached. Clara's lawyer read it one last time and nodded. Thomas's lawyer took barely 3 minutes to confirm. "Done," Thomas said, capping the pen, his voice as smooth and flat as glass. "From now on, everything follows my schedule." His Tribeca penthouse opened like another world. A private elevator, floor-to-ceiling windows, and the Hudson River gliding calmly under the cold sunlight. The color scheme was gray, black, and white, orderly, minimalist, not a single wasted detail. Clara stepped in, carrying one compact suitcase and a tube of blueprints. She set the tube on the long table in the living room, feeling a faint weight in her chest before such flawless precision. "Your room's on the east side," Thomas said, pointing. "Closet arranged, private bath, security lock with fingerprint scan. I hate surprises." Clara glanced briefly at an abstract painting on the wall, blue-gray strokes intertwining like waves, then turned back. "I don't like surprises either." Footsteps clicked sharply against the marble floor. A dark-haired woman in a charcoal suit appeared. Lucia D'Angelo. She shook Clara's hand, her palm cool and steady. "Welcome to Sterling." "Sterling? The penthouse?" Clara half joked. "Sterling? Everything my brother owns," Lucia replied, the corner of her mouth lifting in a hint of a smile that wasn't quite one. Her eyes swept over the suitcase, the blueprint tube, the carefully dried shoes, taking in every detail like data. "I'm the COO of the company and the one who clears the path for anything that needs to appear in front of a camera." "Nice to meet you." Lucia nodded, then lowered her voice just enough for Clara to hear. "My brother doesn't love anyone. Don't try to be the exception." The words dropped into the pristine room like a pebble into still water. Clara met her gaze calmly. "I'm here to do my part of the job." "Good," Lucia said, closing the conversation with a polite smile. "Your schedule's in your inbox. Tomorrow night is the Garrison Gala. When Lucia left, Thomas leaned against the edge of the open kitchen counter, flipping through a few pages of paperwork. Some ground rules, he said without looking up. No intimacy. No emotions. Everything is for appearances. In public, I'll hold your hand or place mine on your back if needed. At home, we operate as two people sharing a space. I make the final call on media and image-related matters. Understood, Clara replied, and I reserve the right to decline any arrangement that undermines my professional integrity. He looked up. Of course. For a moment, his gaze lingered on her face a fraction too long. Not curious, not pitying, more like assessing, the kind of look that makes a person stand a little straighter. Clara realized she was holding her breath and quietly exhaled. Lunch is in the fridge, Thomas said, voice returning to its even tone. My assistant will come by to adjust your wardrobe for tomorrow night's event. I have meetings. The office door closed behind him, leaving Clara alone with the wide glass panels and the distant hum of the city. She walked down the hall, running her fingers along the smooth wood and the cold metal handles. Her room faced east, crisp white sheets, a clean desk with a technical drawing stand, and a small bouquet of white flowers on the table. Welcome. No signature. Clara unrolled the blueprints, spreading them across the bright surface. Lines, ratios, pencil notes. The one language that never betrayed her. She told herself, 6 months. Do it right. Stand tall. Don't bow. That afternoon, Lucia's stylist arrived. Dresses, shoes, velvet boxes lined the bed. The lights caught on the satin like a ribbon of stars. Nothing too extravagant, Clara said. I want to look like myself. Just sharper. Understood, the stylist smiled. We're not turning you into someone else. We're just letting people see you more clearly. Later that night, as Clara tried on pearl earrings in front of the mirror, she caught Thomas's reflection passing down the hall. The warm light traced a golden edge along his jacket sleeve. He paused at her doorway as if about to speak, then only nodded. Their eyes met in the mirror. Steady, unreadable. But something flickered there, swift as recognition. Tomorrow, he said. Don't be late. Never, she answered, lifting her chin. When the hallway lights went out, the room was left with nothing but the sound of her steady heartbeat. No intimacy, no emotions. Everything is for appearances. She repeated it like a mantra. Yet even as she pressed her lips into silence, Clara knew. Every glance of his carried something beyond the contract. Something that shouldn't be named. She switched off the lamp. The city outside still shimmered. And in the quiet dark, the marriage contract ticked like a clock, counting down to their first public appearance. Garrison Gala, the museum building glimmered under layers of silver mist-like light. The carpeted steps shone under dozens of camera flashes. Reporters lined up in 2 rows, microphones raised, questions bursting like fireworks. The car stopped. The door opened. Thomas stepped out first, his tuxedo perfectly tailored, his demeanor so composed that nothing could touch him. Clara placed her hand in his grip tightened just enough to send a signal. Breathe. Walk. They stepped out into the storm of flashes. A few voices shouted, Mr. D'Angelo, tonight you're... Ms. Price, are you... But Thomas only inclined his head slightly, guiding her straight into the grand hall. Inside, the vaulted ceiling rose high above, marble statues standing in silent observation, the delicate chime of crystal glasses in the air. Lucia appeared from the right, giving a calculating nod. The press has enough shots. This round's for partners and board members. The last one, the people waiting to see if you'll deliver what you promised. I always do, Thomas replied curtly. They moved through a cluster of guests, exchanging quick greetings, offering polite handshakes, and performing gestures as if in a ritual. Clara kept a small, steady smile, mindful of posture and angle, not for vanity, but to convey one message. I'm no longer the girl left behind at Bellecourt. Each time they stopped, Thomas introduced her. My wife, Clara. Those 2 words, my wife, fell softly as silk, yet tied as tightly as a sailor's knot. And then they saw Derek. He was standing beside Sophia Hartwell near the center, the brightest, most visible spot in the room, the one he used to claim. Derek turned just as Clara's gaze met his. His face froze. Then he forced a thin smile half a second too late. Sophia stiffened, her fingers tightening around her wineglass. Thomas didn't break stride. He led Clara straight to them. "Good evening," he said, polite to the point of frost. "I don't think you've met my wife." Wife landed like a rubber mallet, quiet but undeniable. Derek swallowed hard, glancing toward a magazine cameraman lazily filming nearby. "Clara, didn't expect to see you here." "Really?" Clara tilted her head, her tone light as a hairpin. "Because I was fairly certain I would see you." Sophia tried to regain her footing with a social smile. "Congratulations on the marriage." That was quick. "Quick enough to be on time," Thomas said evenly. "In business and in life, choosing right matters more than choosing early." The people around them pretended to chat, but their ears were tuned into the conversation. Lucia lingered at a distance, her attention like a radar. Clara felt her spine straighten another inch. She didn't turn away. She let Derek see the calm in her eyes, allowing Sophia to take in her dress and realize that the balance of power had shifted. "We need to greet the board," Thomas concluded, placing a light hand on Clara's back. "Have a pleasant evening, both of you." They walked away, a faint hum of whispers rising behind them like fine dust. In the reflection of a glass display case, Clara caught sight of herself beside the tall man. Gone was the woman who had crumbled by the roadside in the rain. There was only a straight posture, a proud chin, and eyes that knew exactly where they stood. Lucia approached as they paused near the Greek statues. "Phase 1 accomplished," she said succinctly. "The rest, let them draw their own conclusions." Thomas looked at Clara, and for the first time that night, his smile reached his eyes. Faint, barely visible to anyone but her. The smile of a man who had just made the perfect opening move. "Good," he said. "Let's continue." CEOs, investors, and board members all came forward one after another, shaking hands and offering congratulations. Each time Thomas said, "My wife," the looks they received shifted, from skepticism to acknowledgement. PR would handle the aftermath, but this moment belonged to the image, and the image was standing right there. By the end of the evening, as the orchestra began a slow waltz, Thomas leaned slightly toward her. "A dance?" Clara placed her hand in his. "For the image," she reminded him. "Of course," he replied in his neutral tone. They glided across the floor, not too close, not too far. The lights drew a fine gold line along his sleeve, and in a quiet measure of the music, his eyes lingered on hers. Brief, deep, like an unspoken confirmation, the first battle is won. As they left the hall, reporters' questions flared again. "Mr. D'Angelo, can you confirm you're married?" Thomas tightened his grip on her hand and turned toward the lights. "I confirm," he said. Then he leaned toward Clara, low enough that only she could hear. "You did well." "We did well," she corrected softly, her smile touching the corner of her lips. The city night opened before them, lights spilling like confetti, and somewhere beneath the cold, precise rules of their contract, Clara knew. Something had started to move, something neither of them could keep pretending was just for show. On her first day at Sterling Group, Clara didn't receive a polished office or a gold-plated nameplate. She was assigned a small meeting room with a white glass board, a computer loaded with BIM software, and a stack of files labeled Harbor 1, a mixed-use riverfront project stuck in structural review and fire safety approval. "You have 72 hours, Lucia said flatly, leaving no room for argument. "Next week, the board votes on the budget. If you don't unblock this, the project's frozen." Clara didn't say okay just for formality. She rebuilt the entire structural model, called the city fire department 3 times to confirm the evacuation routes, re-extracted the smoke ventilation files, and by the first night, deleted the entire commercial ground floor plan. "What on earth are you doing?" the project manager gasped from the doorway. "Removing the moldy bread," Clara replied, her hand steady on the mouse. 1-meter-wide corridors don't pass code, stair widths insufficient, and the atrium lacks positive pressure. We redo it, but this time we do it right. On day 2, she shifted the stair core and mechanical room, compressing auxiliary functions into the center shaft to open a continuous evacuation spine from the parking level up. On day 3, she finalized the new proposal. The commercial area was reduced by only 2%, but egress performance was optimized. Structural costs were cut by 7.8% due to shorter beam spans, and, most importantly, the review documents would likely pass on the first round. The presentation before the board started at 8 a.m. Clara stood before the LED screen, her tone calm and deliberate. "We're not selling square footage. We're selling the experience of safety and operational efficiency. This proposal delivers both." 7 seconds of silence followed. Then a board member tapped his pen on the table. "How soon can the revised set be submitted?" "4 business days," Clara replied. "I've already booked the review appointment." "Good." He nodded and turned to Thomas. "If Harbor 1 goes through, next quarter's budget won't get locked up." Thomas had sat in the back the entire time, silent, observing. He didn't interrupt, didn't step in. He simply watched how she commanded a room full of men used to giving orders. When the meeting ended, he lingered in the hallway, eyes following Clara as she discussed details with the technical team. "She turns everything she touches into a system," his assistant murmured, "and she's not afraid of anyone." "No," Thomas said quietly. "She's afraid, but chooses not to retreat." That afternoon, a crisis hit. The contractor reported a localized steel shortage and a formwork collapse during a load test at another site. The technical office erupted into chaos. Clara didn't yell into the phone. She opened the map, marked the affected area, ordered an immediate stop to testing, cut auxiliary power, set up soft barriers, and dispatched a small team to take on-site measurements with a safety checklist. "Report it to the authorities, proactively," she instructed. "Don't let the press say it first." On the live conference feed, Thomas watched her issue orders with the composure of someone solving a math problem. In that strange, still moment, he realized what was coursing through him wasn't desire, but respect. Quiet, grounding respect that needed no performance. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about owning someone to keep them in his plan. He just wanted to take half a step back, to make room for her to shine. Late that night, Lucia stopped by his office and dropped a report on his desk. "It's stable. She's keeping the pace, but you're not." Thomas looked up. "What do you mean?" Lucia leaned against the doorframe, her dark eyes unwavering. "You're looking at her like she's more than a chess move. Feelings are fatal weaknesses." "I'm not confusing work," Thomas said evenly. "No," Lucia murmured. "You're confusing yourself." The door closed. Thomas stood under the warm light, staring at the project models lined neatly on the shelves. Beyond the glass wall, the city glowed like a circuit board. Somewhere in that vast night, Clara was still adjusting a steel detail, a floor elevation, a number too small for anyone else to notice. But it was the kind of detail that kept a building standing, and maybe she was holding something in him together too. His phone buzzed, a message from Clara, submitted revised drawings, meeting with fire department at 9 a.m. tomorrow. "Get some sleep, boss." Thomas looked at the screen, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Respect over possession. The words crossed his mind like a quiet note. He typed back, "Good. Sleep early, architect." On the other end, the typing dots blinked, then disappeared. Night fell. Harbor 1, and something between the two of them, was beginning to take shape, moving from uncertainty toward structure. Soul Stories fam, if you're watching on another channel, come home to us at Soul Stories, where tens of thousands of listeners and sharers come together. The explosion wasn't loud, more a muffled thud, like a punch to the chest. But the ground trembled and a cloud of cement dust billowed up. At the West Pier construction site, an underground chamber had suffered a compressed air malfunction during a system test. The first report read, "No casualties, minor structural damage." The headlines didn't. Sources claim the design supervisor is the CEO's wife. The cable news voice dripped like oil. Headlines followed, "Contract bride, real explosion," and "Fake marriage, real promotion." Anonymous accounts leaked internal emails implying Clara used her relationship to skip protocol. In the emergency meeting, Clara spread the blueprints across the table, highlighter in hand. The malfunction was in cell B3, she pointed out, unrelated to structural adjustments. The pneumatic system was locked, but an auxiliary valve wasn't patched. It's an operational error. We're accountable, but it's not a design flaw. The press won't care about the difference, one division head muttered, sweat gathering at his temple. Then we'll make them care, Clara said, eyes fixed on the schematic. Transparency, origin, process, logs. And right now, a 60-second video from the chief engineer reassuring local residents. Thomas stood in the corner, arms crossed, silent as a shadow. When the projector flashed the latest tweet, a scandal page claiming Clara Price married by contract to become lead designer, his jaw tightened, eyes turning cold. Comms, he said in a low tone. Refute false claims with legal documentation. Legal team, trace the source. I want the data relay chain in 2 hours. Lucia leaned in. This source isn't an amateur. No, Thomas replied, gaze locked on the metadata feed. Someone who knows the law well enough to stay on the legal edge. Someone with a personal motive. A name struck both their minds at once, like a signal on the same frequency. Derek. By early afternoon, the compiled report confirmed it. The leaked emails traced back to a small PR firm recently hired for image consulting by Derek Price's exploratory political campaign. Payments circled through 2 shell companies. Lucia laid the printed sheet before Thomas, tapping a finger against the corner. He's working with our competitors, twisting the fake marriage narrative to smear her. Clara stood still for a beat, not out of surprise, out of exhaustion. Exhausted from seeing her name dragged through the mud again. I'm fine, she said hoarsely. I can handle it. No. Thomas turned sharply. The word fell heavy, like a door latch. No one gets to make you endure this again. The room went silent. Clara looked up. In his eyes wasn't fury burning hot, but something colder. The kind of anger that resolves things without shouting. What's the move? Lucia asked, though she already knew part of it. Legal, a retraction request, or a lawsuit, Thomas said. PR, full transparency, West Pier protocols, field video, maintenance logs, internal, audit all data channels and lock external portals. And as for Derek, he paused, his expression darkening. We let him trip over his own words. How? Clara asked quietly. By giving him a confidential source he can't resist, Lucia said with a razor-thin smile. A data leak with a watermark. Thomas nodded. He wants a fake marriage story? We'll feed him one polished enough to bite, but the file will carry an invisible signature only he can leak. Once it's out, the watermark will expose him. Clara watched the 2 siblings exchange plans, feeling a mix of protection and empowerment. And what about me? You don't apologize for what you didn't do, Thomas said. You appear as the only person who can explain the difference between design and operation. You speak to the public, calmly, factually as yourself. That night, Clara filmed a short statement at the site, wearing a safety helmet with white lights cutting across the grid lines on the floor. The B3 malfunction was unrelated to structural changes. This is our repair and inspection process. We're publishing the full report online. No excuses, no tremor in her voice. The clip spread fast. Comments poured in. She talks like an actual engineer, not a PR bride. Below it, the legal team posted the official documents, stamped and verified. Before dawn, Lucia's message arrived. Watermark triggered. Their friend had taken the bait. Thomas watched the leaked file trace back to the expected inbox, feeling a strange calm settle in. The storm still raged, but its eye was now visible. Clara walked in, the scent of night and dust still clinging to her coat. News? Thomas turned, stepping close enough for his voice to drop to a private rumble. Yes, and remember this, Clara. Your job may require resilience, but enduring humiliation is not part of your job description. She nodded, eyes glimmering. Not from weakness, but from the relief of being seen. Her skill, her worth, recognized not through a marriage, but through merit. Outside, dawn broke. Inside, another battle began. But this time, she was no longer standing alone in the rain. The data map appeared on the massive LED screen like a giant floor plan. grids, arrows, intersections. Clara stood with her arms crossed, facing it as if she were analyzing a half-built structure. If we want to find the leak, she said, we need to rebuild the path of information. It's like tracing a load path, from the point of stress to the point of collapse. Lucia snapped her fingers, and the IT security team overlaid additional log layers. Timelines appeared in ribbons across the display. An assistant projected overlapping files from Sterling's internal servers. Harbor One's progress reports, West Pier's bidding plan, and an unreleased outline for a future harbor redevelopment. All of them had passed through an external system. Hartman and Associates, the law firm representing multiple clients, including Derek Price. These data packets were all tagged after the B3 incident, Lucia said, a small smirk tugging at her lips. Hidden watermarks, Thomas's idea. Clara nodded and bent over the whiteboard. A watermark's just a symbol on the drawing, she said, but I want to add parameters that identify who touched the file. She drew quick strokes with her pen. We'll embed micro-variances, imperceptible edits that don't alter meaning. Change a secondary figure on page 6, swap 2 caption lines on page 11, rename an image file for each recipient. Every copy gets its own structural model. Whoever leaks it, I'll know by sight. Thomas stood back, arms folded, watching in silence. His gaze rested on her shoulders as Clara leaned toward the screen. Focused, calm, strong, without even trying to be. And for the first time that day, he understood why those hard-nosed executives had stopped interrupting and simply listened when she spoke that morning. By afternoon, the information flow diagram was complete. An internal presentation file, marked with the variant swapped captions on page 11, had traveled through the legal liaison's email to Hartman and Associates for contract review. From Hartman's server, it had bounced to a personal address, Derek.Pry *@*, then forwarded to a small PR firm currently being paid to manage public perception for Derek's exploratory campaign. Enough? Lucia asked. Enough for legal, the head of cybersecurity replied, and enough for the FBI if this crosses into trade fraud territory. Clara zoomed in on page 11. The 2 swapped caption lines, her unique signature, glared unmistakably on the screen. There was no doubt. A slow breath escaped her chest, not out of relief, but regret. Regret for the years she'd once believed Derek represented something decent. Thomas turned toward her. Clara. She met his gaze. He didn't touch her, only said low and measured, You don't need me to protect you. You just saved my entire company. The words landed in the room like the click of a signature. Every head turned toward Clara, not as the CEO's wife, but as the lead engineer who had just recalculated a failing structure. The power gap between them, once written coldly in a contract, suddenly felt absurd, because in reality she was the one who had just laid the beams and columns for something stronger, the trust of an entire system. What's next? She asked calmly. Lucia's smile sharpened. A trap. And so, Operation Red Hook was born. Not a loud confrontation, but a precisely engineered structure, every component placed in balance, waiting for the exact load until the traitor would expose himself like a weak joint under stress. Internal codename, Red Hook Waterfront, a project so enticing that any information thief would reach for it. The bait message, Sterling was negotiating to acquire an old pier to develop a logistics commercial residential complex and would present a preliminary design at 2 p.m. on Thursday at a partner-owned warehouse in Red Hook. 3 versions of the file, Clara said, spreading 3 identical-looking boards across the table. Version A has swapped captions on page 4, version B reorders the image references on page 9, and version C slightly alters the file name on the cover sheet. Each version goes through a different route to identify the leak. Lucia handled the rest, a list of people who would accidentally overhear the meeting time, a mock security schedule, and a few conveniently overheard phone calls in crowded places. Thomas reached out to an old acquaintance, a federal agent specializing in trade fraud, under the most unremarkable pretense, a discussion about museum charity funding. We'll be there if any exchange of internal data, money laundering, or coercion occurs, the agent said curtly. Priority is safety. No heroics. By Thursday noon, the presentation site, a warehouse owned by a clean Sterling subsidiary, was wired with cameras and microphones, with every entrance quietly guarded. Vincent, head of internal security, stood at the back door like a monolith. Thomas and Clara arrived early. She walked the space, setting up a minimalist display, a few boards, a 3D model on the screen, a laser pointer. Nervous? Thomas asked. Feels like waiting for the results of my first structural audit, she replied with a small smile. But I've checked the trap's load path. It'll hold. 2:12 p.m. 3 unfamiliar cars slid into the lot, doors opening in sync. The first to enter weren't Derek, but 2 men in dark suits, eyes sweeping the space like laser scanners. They fanned out, checking corners. Then Derek stepped in. Crisp shirt, hastily tied tie. Confidence forced onto a face that couldn't hide its tension. Where's the design? One man demanded, his voice tight. We were told there's a presentation at 2. You're right on time, Thomas said, emerging from behind a row of crates, his tone cold as steel. For a meeting you were never invited to. Derek froze. Thomas, this is a misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding tonight, Lucia cut in from the side, is thinking you could get away with this. She gave a slight nod. From the back door, 2 FBI agents entered silently. Their jackets parted just enough to reveal their badges. Overhead, the red light on a camera switched on. Clara stepped up beside the screen, her hand resting on the Red Hook portfolio. She opened the cover and aimed the laser pointer at the corner. The file name here contains a deliberate formatting flaw I embedded. Only one version carries that flaw. The one sent through Hartman and Associates. She paused, eyes fixed on Derek, which was then forwarded to your personal email before landing at your PR firm. There was no room left for pretense. An agent moved forward. Derek Price, you'll need to come with us to answer questions regarding insider trading, commercial fraud, and suspected money laundering through PR contracts. You have no right, Derek barked, but his wrists were already caught in practiced hands. His partners backed off as the agent read his rights aloud with mechanical precision. Outside, a reporter, prepositioned by the FBI as a passerby, raised his camera. The flash didn't make Clara flinch this time. She gripped the edge of the presentation board and stood tall. This is your smear game, Derek shouted, thrashing. He glared at Clara. You married for money, for status. Clara's voice stayed steady, each word cutting as clean as a beamline. I'm standing here because of my work. You're standing there because of your gambling debts. Enough, Thomas said quietly, taking a single step forward. The agents led Derek away. The clatter of shoes and handcuffs faded, leaving only the sound of air. The kind of silence that comes after a structure survives its maximum load without cracking. Outside, the press was waiting, lights, microphones, questions piling over one another. Thomas stopped just short of the barricade, the security team forming a line. He didn't offer a statement of apology, nor did he say, "We deeply regret." He said only one sentence, slow enough for every recorder to catch. The woman he once humiliated is the reason Sterling still stands. A ripple went through the crowd. Beside him, Clara felt her heart beat, not from fear, but from the rightness of it all. Truth stood upright. Deceit bowed before the law. Lucia snapped her tablet shut and murmured, "Trap integrity. Perfect. Zero deflection." Clara smiled. "Because we calculated the load correctly." Thomas turned to her, his gaze stripped of distance. Calm, deep, respectful. No declarations, no promises. Something solid, like concrete, cured to its full strength. From that night on, the power gap between them no longer existed. The elevator rose in silence, slicing through the night like a blade. Beneath them, the city still pulsed. Traffic lights changing, horns flickering like short-circuited wires. But inside that steel chamber, there was only the sound of 2 people breathing after a night that had gone on too long. The doors slid open. The penthouse greeted them with open height, floor-to-ceiling glass reflecting the Hudson River, dark and glittering like a muted score. Thomas removed his jacket and hung it neatly. Every movement was precise to the point of cruelty, as he always was. Clara stood still in the center of the room, fingers brushing the cold edge of the marble table. "Would you like tea?" he asked, voice calm to the point of detachment. "No." She looked at him. "I want to hear what you're going to say." Thomas paused, then stepped closer, keeping the exact distance of a man who measured boundaries with a steel ruler. "We're stopping here," he said flatly. "The contract ends. Tonight." Clara closed her eyes briefly as if the words were a sudden gust of ice to the chest. When she opened them, she was still standing. "Why?" "Because you're standing in the eye of the storm. Anyone who wants to hurt me will use you as bait. I can protect the company from competitors. I can handle the media. I can go through every legal protocol." His voice lowered, dark as a ravine. "What I can't endure is one day seeing you under hospital lights. Just because you stood next to me." The night wind brushed through the curtains. Clara slowly set her bag down on a chair and took a step closer. "So you've decided for me?" "No, I'm deciding my part." Thomas slipped his hands into his pockets, voice dropping an octave. "The remaining payment will go through. Temporary housing, private security, your own legal team. It's all arranged. You can leave tonight. Starting tomorrow, the public story will be simple. We weren't compatible." He met her gaze, unwavering. "It's the safest way." "For whom?" Clara asked. The hand in his pocket clenched. His face didn't change. "For you." She let out a faint laugh. Not mocking, just a sound falling onto marble and shattering into small fragments. "You can end a contract," she said clearly, "but you can't end feelings." Thomas froze. Something flickered across his eyes, then vanished like a motion sensor light. "Clara!" "No!" She cut in, stepping forward until their breaths overlapped. "Don't say my name like you're coaxing an employee to sign a report." "Tonight, at the Red Hook warehouse, you stood in front of me when the cameras flashed. In front of the press, you said, 'The woman he once humiliated is now the reason Sterling still stands.'" That wasn't the voice of a CEO reading a statement. That was a man, afraid of losing. He closed his eyes, inhaled deeply, as if trying to stretch air into a chest that had no room left. "Afraid?" he echoed hoarsely. "Yes, I'm afraid." "Then don't turn fear into exile," Clara said softly. "Don't call it protection while you're pushing me away. I walked into this with my head held high. Don't take that choice away from me." The words hung between them. From the street below, a siren wailed, distant and fading. Thomas lowered his head, pinching the bridge of his nose. His habit when every option before him carried a crack. "When you came," he began, voice pulled from somewhere deep, "I set rules. No intimacy, no emotions, everything procedural. I thought it would keep things clean, efficient, risk-free." He lifted his eyes, something raw glinting there. "But this morning, when you stood before a room of people who make a sport of crushing others with questions, I just wanted them to shut up and listen to you. At the warehouse, when the FBI dragged Derek out, I realized no amount of control would help if a single stray bullet found you. And right now, standing here, I know every contract is meaningless if you're not here tomorrow." Clara felt her chest tighten. "Then don't cancel it. Don't use safety as an excuse to run." Something cracked open, quietly like the final joint in a structure giving way for something new to align. Thomas stepped back half a pace, then suddenly knelt. There was no ring, no flowers, no audience. Just a man who'd spent a lifetime on higher ground, now lowering himself to say the hardest words he'd ever had to. "I love you," he said, his voice trembling for the first time since she'd known him. "So much it terrifies me." The words were unadorned, unpolished, as real and rough as an old scar he'd never shown anyone. Clara bent down, resting her hand on his shoulder. The moment their skin met, her heartbeat shifted rhythm. "I'm scared too," she whispered. "Scared of lights, of gossip, of closed doors. But most of all, I'm scared of leaving without saying this. I love you." Thomas looked up. Between them hung every night he'd hidden his heart behind boardroom walls, every rainstorm she'd weathered alone. "Clara," he said, this time like a plea, "I don't know how to love someone without breaking them." "Then we'll learn," she said through a tearful smile. "You taught me power. I'll teach you gravity. The heart has structure too." It can bear the load, if we place the beams right. He gave a soft, surrendered laugh. So you'll be its chief engineer? I already am. He stood, still holding her hand, gripping it like someone who'd finally found solid ground. The contract, he said quietly. I'll tear it up. You can tear it, she nodded. Just don't tear us. City lights spilled through the glass, scattering across the floor like blueprint squares. Thomas lifted a hand to her face, his thumb hesitating at her cheek, as if afraid that too much pressure might break the fragile thing between them. Let me, he said. Drop the walls tonight. I left the gates open long ago, she replied. They kissed. Not the rehearsed kind for cameras, but the kind shared by two people who'd survived an explosion and walked out of the debris. It wasn't rushed, but deep. Not showy, but absolute. His hand found the back of her neck, steady, hers pressed against his back, feeling each breath slow, then steady. Outside, Manhattan flickered like an overheated circuit board. Inside, another system was rewiring itself. No intimacy, no feelings, purely formal rule peeled away like protective film stripped from glass. When their lips parted, their foreheads rested together. I'll make mistakes, Thomas murmured. I'll try to control too much. I'll remind you to let go, Clara said. And when I try to do everything alone, you'll remind me to lean on you. He nodded, a rare smile reaching his eyes. New agreement, he said. No signatures, no stamps, but binding, together. Together, she repeated. They stood there between the city's glowing grids for a long time. The clock ticked softly. His hand stayed at her neck, confirming that the moment was real. In the living room, the jacket he'd hung earlier swayed faintly. Outside, the wind changed direction. No more elevator hums, no more slamming doors. Just the sound of two people breathing in sync. Tomorrow, Thomas said, I'll tell Lucia there's no contract left to manage. Tomorrow, Clara smiled, I'll go to work as the woman you respect, not your chess move. Tomorrow, he added, pulling her closer, I'll love you with a little less fear. And the day after, she murmured against his lips, we'll love like we were never afraid. Outside, a ferry blinked its light across the dark river, leaving behind a thin line of glow. In that glass-walled room, two people had chosen each other, not out of deal or leverage, but because they'd seen the same promise in each other's eyes. I'm here. You're here. We're here. And that night, beneath the city lights, they shattered every wall still standing. 3 months passed as swiftly as a clean pencil stroke drawing a beamline. Decisive, no hesitation. Price Studio had opened in Chelsea, a small but bright floor, spotless drafting tables, white models on shelves like breathing lungs. Clara had signed 6 contracts, a primary school lighting renovation, 2 residential blocks designed for cross-ventilation, a community center with a green rooftop. The press praised her projects as refined, practical, and deeply human. Her reputation stood solidly on skill, not on the D'Angelo name. That evening, a message from Thomas contained only one line. Saturday night. Bellecourt. No explanation. She understood. A wound doesn't truly heal until you return to where it bled. That night, Bellecourt looked both unchanged and entirely different. The crystal chandeliers still shimmered. The marble floors still gleamed, but they no longer felt cold. The room was filled with faces powerful enough to steer money and media alike. Investors, top architects, bankers, and a few politicians who had somehow managed to retain their integrity. They came because of Thomas, but everyone knew who the real center of gravity was. The woman who had once been humiliated here. Lucia arrived early in a midnight blue gown, checking the lighting, camera angles, and walking paths. She touched Clara's hand lightly. Time to rewrite the caption for this picture, she said. Sophia appeared soon after, her golden hair pinned up neatly, her eyes uncertain. I owe you an apology, she murmured when they met in the corridor. Not for choosing Derek, that was my decision, but for standing there that night and saying nothing. Clara smiled, not bitterly, but with calm grace. You don't owe me anything. I owe myself one night to come back. The strings began to play, a soft invitation. Lucia signaled for the lights to warm. Thomas stepped out to the center of the hall, tuxedo perfectly tailored, his smile faint. He extended his hand. Clara placed hers in it. Simple, like that first time on the Garrison steps. Except this time, her heart didn't tremble. He led her through the rows of tables, past the watching eyes, and stopped exactly where Derek once set down a ring box, like a full stop on a woman's worth. Suddenly, Clara realized her heartbeat was calm, steady as the rhythm of a hammer on steel once a structure finds its balance. Thomas turned to face her, his voice resonant enough for all to hear, yet without flourish. 3 months ago, at Red Hook, I learned something. Even the strongest man can fall if he doesn't respect the one standing beside him. Tonight, in the place where you once fell, I want to say this clearly. He tightened his grip, not to possess, but to anchor. The first time I proposed because of a contract. This time, because of every real reason. The room hushed as if someone had drawn the sound out of the air. Thomas knelt. No dramatic music, no fireworks. Only the marble floor that once bore her trembling shoes now reflected the silhouette of a man laying down his pride. I love you, he said, looking up, unguarded, for the way you redrew escape routes, not just for a building, but for my life. For how you face rumors, just as you face the wind on a rooftop. For keeping your name, your craft, and still making space for me. No one coughed, no one moved. In the corner, Sophia pressed a hand to her mouth to stop a tear. Lucia's lips curved slightly, a quiet stamp of approval. Clara looked at the man before her, the one who once mistook control for safety, now freely dismantling his own walls. She remembered the girl who had sat on a rainy curb, the strange hand that reached out, the night in the penthouse when the words together replaced every clause in their agreement. Thomas, she said softly, her voice smooth as polished stone. Stand up. He did, still holding her hand. Together they turned to face the crowd. Thomas spoke once more, closing the old chapter for good. Derek Price is where the law now has its say. But tonight isn't about him. It's about her, the woman who kept Sterling standing and who taught me how to love again. Applause rose, not loud or showy, but deep and steady, like the rhythmic strike of builders marking completion. Clara didn't bow. She only tightened her grip on Thomas's hand and looked straight into the lights. This place had once swallowed her whole. Tonight it gave her back everything it had taken, her dignity, her voice, and a proposal that, at last, was real. The fountain pen slid across the paper, bearing witness. No more temporary, no more addenda. Just simple, unadorned letters. Clara Price D'Angelo. She kept her own last name like an axis line on a blueprint, the one that defines every room, every door, every emergency exit, and she added his name beside it like a windbrace, not to block the horizon, but to help the structure stand firm against storms. The ceremony was warm and small. Thomas's mother, Maria, pressed her palm gently to Clara's cheek and whispered something in Italian. Lucia read the new terms aloud. None. Vincent stood by the door, smiling for the first time without a trace of duty. There were no live stream cameras, just a few film photos, grainy, soft like mist. Afterward, they returned to the penthouse. The city below burned in bands of light. Thomas stood before the glass, his hand wrapped around hers. I used to think love was the variable that ruins the equation, he said quietly. Turns out it's the boundary condition. Without it, the problem has no solution. Clara smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. And I used to think one public humiliation could erase everything I'd built. Turns out it was just a load test, to prove the structure could hold. The next day, the press buzzed over the single photo that slipped out. 2 people standing by a window. No flashy rings, no sensational headline. Just one deliberate quote Lucia accidentally let leak. No humiliation is strong enough to break a woman who knows her worth. The sentence spread like a beam of light. Women began writing to Price Studio, sharing stories of canceled interviews and promotions denied. Young men sent resumes for internships, saying they wanted to learn how to design safely without losing beauty. At Sterling, Thomas signed a new internal policy. Every project must publish its construction safety checklist in plain, accessible language. At Price Studio, Clara hung a small photograph. A little girl with braided hair wearing a hard hat, holding a red pen as she corrected an emergency exit sign. It was a gift from a student after Clara's lecture. A safe city begins with the right exits. Every night they shared a ritual, standing by the window, looking at Manhattan, the city they once thought would devour them. The city was still noisy, people still fell, and headlines still missed the point. But beneath the tangled grids, small structures were taking root. A young firm refusing projects where investors demanded cost-cutting at the expense of safety. A corporation learning how to apologize publicly. A powerful man remembering to bow his head to the woman he loved. Mrs. Price D'Angelo, Thomas said, tasting the name that meant both keep and add. How does that sound? Like a building with a glass facade that reflects the sky. But whose frame is reinforced steel? She said, tilting her head. Like a city that finally learned to put up clear signs. Like a heart that's been stress-tested. He laughed softly and pulled her into his arms. Somewhere far away, a church bell marked the hour. No fireworks, only two breaths, finding the same rhythm. They didn't promise to never be afraid. Fear, after all, is what keeps people alive. They only promised to never back down because of fear, because love is what teaches people how to live right. On Sunday morning, they walked along the Riverside Park. A little girl pointed, whispering, "Mom, that's the architect from the internet." Clara bent down with a smile. "Would you like to see what an emergency exit looks like?" The girl nodded, eyes wide. Thomas stood beside them, hands in his pockets, smiling quietly. The smile of a man who finally understood that power takes many forms, and the one he'd choose for the rest of his life was to lift up. That evening, they stood again by the glass wall. Manhattan glittered below, no longer a monster, but a circuit diagram. Orderly, humming, alive. Clara rested her forehead on his shoulder and whispered, "We're not a fairy tale. We're a long-term project." "And I," Thomas said, squeezing her hand, "am the lifelong apprentice of the chief engineer." Outside, the bridge lights over the river flickered on. Inside, a new life began, not sealed by a contract, but by a choice renewed every day. And each time they chose, they remembered that night at Bellecourt, the place where she once fell, and where she rose to say yes. Forever. Not because the world had softened, but because she had learned her worth, and he had learned to guard it as carefully as he guarded his own heart.